Hello, Blake Grudas here with Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com, and today I want to talk to you about Dehaze and how Dehaze has now been added to the newest versions of Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom in our gradients, our brushes, and our radials. This is absolutely incredible. If you're wondering why I sound funny right now, it's because I have this epic battle going on right now with my sinuses. I'm not going to let them win. I'm not going to let them not let you have a tutorial this Friday, all right? So let's jump into this. Here is our overall before. Take a look, 0 exposure value, no HDR. Here's our overall after. That's pretty epic difference, all right? A bunch of epic stuff happening this week. But if you're wondering, yeah, you could do that without Dehaze, you're right. But Dehaze is doing a lot in this image with our gradient tool that you are gonna be probably a little amazed by. I know I was. Let's jump in. All right, so it looks like, if you ask for something long enough, Adobe will finally pay attention to you and put it where you want it to go. So in the last tutorial I did on the Dehaze adjustment that was new for the newest version of Photoshop and Camera Raw and Lightroom for that matter, we discussed many times how we would love to have Dehaze as a brush. Well, now Dehaze is in our brushes, our gradients, and our radials. This is awesome. So I'm going to show you how to make an epic sunset today with this Dehaze tool. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and just make this image look a little bit better. So I am one of those people who loves snow. I can't wait for the snow, and I love doing sunset shots in the snow. So that's what we're looking forward to today. A little foreshadowing for our future for anyone here in the Midwest who gets snow in the wintertime. So the first thing I'm going to do is really just kind of clean up this image and make it look good before I go into the brushes. So I always start out with the basic panel here and just kind of manipulate these settings to see if I can get something that I like out of this before moving on to the brushes. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this sky nice and yellow up there. So we'll start out with a nice yellow sunset, and we'll end up changing that later, but I want to just make this nice and bright and powerful. And then let's look at the tint here. So we'll bring this up, we'll bring it down. Let's start ourselves off like that. Now you're wondering why I went so high on the orange, and I'll get into that when I get into the Dehaze slider in a second. So now let's go to the exposure, and we'll increase that exposure. Just brighten that up a little bit, just about there. And then our contrast, let's take a look here. I'm going to mess with contrast in a minute. Typically, I like to go with the highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks before I go to contrast. So I'm going to do your typical, HDR look here. So I'm going to drop this down to -79. I'm going to take my shadows, move them all the way up, bring my whites all the way down, my blacks all the way up. So that looks pretty ugly, right? But that's where the contrast comes in here. We can take this contrast slider and add some contrast to this and really bring up the contrast in here to fill in kind of that nasty, garish HDR look that we have. And I'm not done yet. Now, let's just look at our before and after. This is our before, here's our after. I'm really giving myself a baseline to edit with my gradients off of now. So now I'm gonna go into my gradient tool, and this is where I'm gonna show you Dehaze. So let's go ahead and just reset all of these to their local selections and just plus on the Dehaze. And I'm gonna go ahead and select the mask down here. Mine is set to magenta, yours might be a different color. I choose magenta because typically magenta doesn't rest in many of our photos. So it's really easy to see the mask on magenta. So I'm just gonna go ahead and drag this down a little bit and start from there and just go right to the tops of those trees. Now, if you wanted to, you could go into the brush and you could brush out those trees too. But with this type of gradient in the workflow that we're using here, none of these are prominent features to the point that we really need to worry about that. So now I'm going to take that mask off so I can see what's happening here. And watch what happens when I bring the Dehaze up. Now, I told you before that I set that to a very orangish sky to begin with, because when you look at Dehaze, if you bring it down, it seems to add a little bit of yellow to our scene as we bring it down, and it adds quite a bit of blue as we bring it up. So we kind of need to counter produce that there. So I'm going to start out by just bringing my Dehaze to +50, and then I'll go back up here to my temperature and my tint and modify that accordingly to see what I like. So it looks like it needs a little bit more yellow there. And that's okay. Let's look at our tint. Ooh, that looks really good when we start to bring that up. And we bring that up to +57. Now, clarity here. Clarity can actually help add a lot of depth to that sunset as well. You see, as we bring it up, it's going to increase the depth in those clouds, or if we bring it down, it's going to make those clouds nice and fuzzy. It depends on the look and feel of what you are trying to bring in your image. So with this sunset, I really want to punch it up a little bit. So I'm going to bring up the clarity here. And now we get the ability to go through our exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks just for what's happening in our sky. Beautiful thing here, what they've done with these gradient tools. Very powerful stuff. If you're in Adobe Camera Raw like I am, you can also do the exact same stuff here in Lightroom with the Lightroom gradient panels here. So if you upgrade it to the newest version of CC, this dehaze slider is not only going to be by itself over here in the effects. You have dehaze over here in the effects, but you also have it in your gradients now. And that's awesome. It's also in your brushes, and it's also in your radial gradients as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the contrast here. Let's go ahead and bump up that contrast a little bit. Really make this a beautiful kind of sky here. Maybe drop the highlights a little bit, and then we'll decrease those shadows to increase some of that depth, and we'll leave the whites and blacks alone. If you wanted to add a little bit more vibrance underneath those clouds, you can add a little bit of white to that. If you want to make those clouds a little bit more dramatic, you can add a little bit of black to it, but I'm just going to leave that right where it is. So I like that. I'm going to add myself a new gradient now. So I'm going to add a gradient that goes from the bottom of the image to the top of the image. So let's go ahead and just do this, just like this. So now we've got our foreground covered too. So what it's going to have here is all the settings that we had before. Well, we don't want the exact same settings, so let's go ahead and reset those local selections there. And let's just start playing here. Let's see what we want. I definitely want to increase the temperature of that ground, not make it so blue. So it kind of gets the warmth of the bottom of the sunset. I kind of like that there. Increase that just a little bit more. And then let's look at our tint and temperature. Maybe bring the tint down just a little bit. Exposure, not going to mess with exposure much. Contrast, let's bring that up just a little bit. Our highlights, we can bring those up, bring our shadows down just a little bit, and then our whites, bring those up quite a bit. And then let's look at our blacks. No, we'll just leave those the way they are. And clarity, maybe increase that just a little bit to increase the detail there. And then if we wanted to add some dehaze, you can see if we increase the dehaze, it's going to make it kind of blue. If we bring it down, it's going to make it slightly orange. So I'm just going to bring that up just a little bit. I mean, not too much at all. So let's go ahead and look what happens if we didn't have the dehaze set in this gradient. So you're wondering, does the dehaze really make a difference? Well, let's set this to 0. I think the dehaze here in the gradient mask makes quite a difference. Bring that back up to 50. Look at the difference there. 0, no dehaze. This would be prior to the newest version of CC, and here is after this version of CC. So let's go to our basic panel here and see what we've done to our overall image. So here is the overall before, and here is the overall after. Now this is a 0 exposure value. Not an HDR image. I didn't tone map anything. Look what you can bring out of a 0, just one single raw file. This is from a Canon 6D, so there's quite a bit of dynamic range information in there, but still not as much dynamic range as in many of the newer higher end Sony sensors these days. So I don't know about you, but I'm pretty dumbfounded by the difference here. Look at the before and look at that after. That's actually pretty darn incredible. So take a look at what you can do with the dehaze adjustment. Remember, it's not only in its own section now, okay? It's not just here. If you go up here, you've got it in your gradients. You can see dehaze there. You've got it in your brush. You can brush in the dehaze. You've also got it in your radials. You can add that in your radials also. So lots of options now. This has opened up some serious doors for your photo editing. Again, my name is Blake Rudis with Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com. If you like this tutorial, please like it, share it, comment on it, send it to a friend, send it to one of those big name photo editing websites to say, hey, we'd like to see you showcase this. Spread the word. This is good stuff here, right? A bunch of free knowledge coming your way. If you subscribe, you automatically get this stuff in your inbox every time I post a tutorial every single Friday. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. Have a great one.